Our next guest is the Honourable Minister David Lametti, Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada. So join me in saying welcome to Minister Lametti.
Oui, je vais. Celui-là, c'est à moi. Merci. Got it. Hello, bonjour, Kwe, No, Tansi, Anin. I would like to begin by acknowledging and thanking all of you for the warm welcome on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. And to the elders taking part, to National Chief Archibald, to all the members of the AFN Executive, youth, women's representatives, and to all the chiefs in Assembly, thank you for welcoming me today. In particular on justice portfolios, merci au chef Picard, as well as to Regional Chief Terry TG for all the work that we have begun to do together. Days like today are an excellent way to continue on the sometimes difficult path of reconciliation, but sometimes exhilarating path of reconciliation. I echo Minister Mark Miller's comments to families who have experienced trauma. And pledge to you to work with all of you to make that situation better. Je crois sincèrement que la réconciliation est un processus qui demande de la patience et de la bonne foi. Je sais que c'est un chemin parfois difficile. Il est arrivé que nous n'étions pas à l'auteur des attentes. Mais si nous sommes sincèrement de bonne foi, si nous avons la volonté d'être ouverts et de collaborer, nous allons faire des progrès malgré les obstacles. J'espère que, comme moi, vous voyez les étapes importantes que nous franchissons ensemble. From my perspective as Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, there are three key areas that we are prioritizing, and I will touch briefly on each of these today. First, addressing the tragedy of residential schools. Second, implementing the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. And thirdly, transforming our criminal justice system. So let me begin with residential schools. This is a critical element of our work to continue to address this tragedy. As you know, in May, I visited the sites of the former St. Joseph's Mission Residential School, the Kokolitsa Residential School, and Indian Hospital Site Memorial in Chilliwack, as well as the Maryvale Indian Residential School in Cowessess. I want to express my deep gratitude to Chief Willie Sellers, to Chief David Jimmy, and to Charlene Belleau, as well as Chief Cadmus Delorme for allowing me to walk with them on sacred grounds. And I want to thank Cookpee Roseanne Kashmir for the continuing dialogue that we have had. It was important for me to be there, to see the land and the buildings that still exist, and to meet personally with elders, survivors, and community leaders. It helped me to learn how communities are dealing with unmarked burials and grave sites, as well as the trauma that these findings have brought to the surface again. Being there with community leaders, being with elders and survivors of the residential school system further reinforced my commitment that together we will see justice done. We continue to provide support and listen to members of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities as they decide on the best course of action for their specific needs. In June, again in collaboration with First Nations leadership, we took a critical step towards healing and justice with the announcement of Kimberly Murray, a Mohawk lawyer from Kanesatake, as independent special interlocutor for missing children and unmarked graves and burial sites associated with Indian residential schools. Madame Murray est particulièrement qualifiée pour remplir ce rôle. Elle est avocate mais a aussi occupé des fonctions de direction au sein de la Commission de vérité et réconciliation et du secrétariat des survivants des 6 nations de Grand River. Sa nomination est une étape essentielle pour favoriser la commémoration respectueuse, la guérison et la justice pour les peuples autochtones au Canada. The special interlocutor will deliver reports not only to me, but to First Nations, Inuit, and Métis leadership on her findings and recommendations. Her office will be functionally independent from government and will have proper resources and funds to fulfill its mandate. Budget 2022 included an investment of $10.4 million over 2 years to ensure that the special interlocutor and her team get this important job done and get it done right. Another important priority is the work to implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. Let me state from the outset that we implemented the United Nations Declaration word for word. We did not exclude anything. We added a preamble, largely on suggestions made by Indigenous leadership, a preamble that includes a formal renunciation of the doctrines of discovery and terra nullius, a preamble that includes a recognition of treaty rights and that this should not derogate from treaty rights. And so I'm pretty proud of the work that's been done so far, but I understand that much more needs to be done. Budget 2022 and 2021 included significant funding to accelerate this transformative work. We shared an update on that work in our first annual progress report, which was released on June 21, National Indigenous Peoples Day. And so I think we're putting the building blocks in to effectively implement that act. And we're doing it in collaboration and conjunction with you, as you'll see in a moment. As a first step, on December 10th, 2021, the government announced the launch of a process to develop the UN Declaration Action Plan in partnership with Indigenous peoples. The process is intended to be broad and inclusive. On the same day, we launched a call for proposals for funding to support Indigenous participation and leadership in the process, including support for Indigenous-led consultations. The call for proposals closed on April 15th, with over 200 proposals received from all regions of Canada. Funding is on its way to Indigenous government bodies, organizations, and groups across the country to support you in developing your priorities for inclusion in the action plan. As well, we have created and staffed a new secretariat within the Justice Department to support the implementation work with Indigenous partners and across all federal government departments. Je tiens à vous assurer que les priorités et les droits des peuples autochtones, incluant les Premières Nations, seront le point de départ de notre travail de mise en œuvre de la loi sur la Déclaration des Nations Unies. Implémenter la déclaration en partenariat avec les peuples autochtones est une avancée considérable pour l'autodétermination des Premières Nations, des Inuits et des Métis. C'est aussi un grand pas pour combler l'écart social et économique et réduire les inégalités. As you know, there was a legislative requirement put in the Act to give it a 2-year time frame to complete the action plan by 2023. So there's a lot of work ahead of us over the next year. Rest assured that our government remains strongly committed to this process, and I'm confident that together we can achieve the transformative promise that the UN Declaration represents. And let me add on a side note that we are going to defend the Bill C-92, recognizing the inherent right of Indigenous peoples to take care of their own children. At the Supreme Court of Canada, we're going to do it in coordination with Indigenous groups that are intervening, and we're going to build on that very strong affirmation of Section 35 rights, including a Section 35 right to self-determination, as a panel of 5 judges found unanimously on the Quebec Court of Appeal. So we're going to defend that decision, and we're going to defend it well. On criminal justice reform, I also want to mention progress there. As Minister Miller mentioned, Les Autochtones demeurent surreprésentés dans notre système judiciaire et ces tristes chiffres continuent d'augmenter. Des statistiques récentes le confirment. Il est particulièrement troublant de constater que les femmes autochtones représentent désormais la moitié des femmes incarcérées dans les établissements fédéraux. This situation is unacceptable, it's shameful, and we have to fix it. As I've said many times, mandatory minimum penalties are one of the reasons for these statistics and the inability to give conditional sentences or home arrest. Bill C-5 makes changes to that by eliminating a number of minimum mandatory penalties and removing the restrictions on conditional sentence orders. The bill's in front of the Senate at committee stage, and we hope to see it pass Parliament soon. But this isn't the only thing that we need to do. It's a piece of a puzzle, and we are investing in the continued application of GLADU principles in the criminal justice system and delivering more relevant services, as well as collaborating with you on the development of an Indigenous justice strategy. Let me just say that BC has exercised leadership in this regard, and so we will work with Indigenous peoples across Canada, but following some of the leads where appropriate that BC has put in place. I'll conclude there, even though I have more to say, and I will answer your questions gladly to the best of my ability. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Lametti. We'll now go on as the process has been, microphone 1, 2, then look towards our hybrid Zoom call. So, if we could start with microphone 1.
Quay, Chief Alan Polches, Sidungsis, St. Mary's First Nations in New Brunswick. Good afternoon, Minister. I come from a province where the Wolastoqey chiefs were calling for an inquiry on the murder of Chantal Moore. And we not only called for it once, twice, but 3 times and was denied. Justice denied is justice delayed. And I expect the federal government to put some pressure on the government of New Brunswick to have inquiries. There's many Indigenous brothers and sisters that are dying on the hands of police in this country. And there's no answers to that because no one has taken responsibility. As a leader in my community and in my nation, I have to carry that burden. I have to carry the sadness that we already face. The government of New Brunswick claims there is no racism in their system. And I need you to assist as Indigenous people when it comes to inquiries when we ask for them. Do you know the gentleman, the police officer that killed Chantal Moore is now back at work? Why are police doing wellness checks without any other folks being involved in that process? I expect the government to do better when it comes to justice for our Indigenous people. Willie Wynn.
Well, and Chief Polches. On microphone 2.
Good afternoon, Minister David. It's good to see you again, and thank you for attending. The co-development of the police legislation is one of the priorities of the government. But it needs more than that. We need a system for the administration of justice, a prosecutor, and we need a court system in our community, a community court system. Otherwise, the police will still have no place to go to prosecute community laws that are broken. And so without that, it'll still remain a toothless tiger, that it'll be words on paper, but it will have no effect on protecting the safety of the community. And quite often what comes to the attention of our council is a lot of criminals who are not band members that we have to ban from the community. And thank God for now the community court, we can get court conditions that they not be found on our reserve again. But there's a lot of trespass to property, and the laws that the federal government doesn't enforce the Indian Act provisions anymore, even though it is the law of Canada, it's unenforced. The Attorney General will not lay information before the court concerning any trespass issues, even though it is the law. And so I just want an update on what is going to happen with furnishing First Nations with prosecutors and some funds to start up a court system.
Thank you, Chief Miracle. If we could have microphone 2 back open, please.
The federal Crown Attorney doesn't prosecute banned bylaws, and neither does the Crown Attorney prosecute bylaws. So there's a void there. And no community should be void of law, but a First Nations is. That's it.
Thank you, Chief Miracle. I have no one with their hands raised joining us through Zoom, so I will go back to microphone 1.
It's Chief Don Harris from Douglas First Nation, and I did raise this at our caucus with you present, but I continue to raise this and try and add a little bit more because we have such little time to talk about these issues and we always get cut off. But again, the UNDRIP, it does work. I know it's a lot of work that's been put in, and it works for a majority of it, of the communities net. But there are a few of us communities that have no treaty, have no self-governing agreements, nor are we negotiating any such agreements. And that takes away our ability to speak in our territories. And as I mentioned earlier in our caucus, is that the provincial policies have given the ability to neighboring communities from neighboring nations the ability to claim our territory, and the UNDRIP will give them the ability to make decisions on in our backyards. And again, is that my community, I'm a remote community, my community has been protecting the resources, and the revenue shares are allowing neighboring communities to take or claim our territory for that purpose. I know there's been tables set up to try and address these issues, the overlap tables and such, but provincial policies have made it even harder by increasing the revenue shares that are given to those that claim our territory, claim my backyard. And I was in New York when Carolyn Bennett made her speech, when she committed Canada to the UNDRIP, but she went on to say that free, prior, and informed consent is the ultimate expression of treaties or self-governing agreements, those which I don't have. And by rolling out the UNDRIP, it basically wipes out my community. It wipes out our ability to use our lands. And so I just want to keep reminding, I know it's going to be an issue on our coming up later, but this is something that by rolling out the UNDRIP, you're going to be wiping out the few of our communities that have no treaties or have no self-governing agreements. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Harris. So I'd like to thank Chief Polches, Chief Miracle, and Chief Harris for their questions, and now turn the stage over to Minister Lametti, if you could have his microphone activated.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, Chief Allen from New Brunswick, look, I like others before me, have expressed our sympathies to the family of Chantal Moore as well as to her community. I know it happened in New Brunswick, but I know her community is here in British Columbia. I've admitted that there's systemic racism in the system. You've heard Minister Miller do it. You've heard Minister Haidu do it. So there is a recognition that we need to fix. And there's a need to fix this, and there's a recognition that we need to attack systemic racism, in particular in policing, and that we need to reform policing. I'm going to bring that message to Minister Mendicino, because it's part of his mandate, and there's a lot. I know that there's a lot more to be done. Believe me, I've heard not just at this set of meetings, but also other meetings that policing is a massive priority. Better policing, more Indigenous-led policing, community policing, however you want to call it, community safety officers, peace officers, etc., in order to ensure the kinds of that what happened to Chantal Moore doesn't happen again. And I fully agree with you that we need to have more balance with respect and more professionalism. I mean, healthcare professionals for healthcare situations. If there's a mental health issue, then there should be medical personnel on a wellness check and not a police officer. So I understand that, and I will bring those concerns to Minister Mendicino, and I've advocated publicly here. I've committed publicly to working with you and working with my colleagues to find solutions to these problems, these challenges. A similar related point to Chief Miracle. I repeat the same commitment, Chief, with respect to bringing the message on policing to Minister Mendicino. On the court systems part of the picture, I'm beginning to invest, it's as part of my mandate, in the resuscitation of Indigenous laws and Indigenous court systems, and I'm willing to work in that regard. I've done some funding through Call to Action 50 of TRC, but also other funding through the Justice Program in a variety of different kinds of court programs across Canada. The ones that work are Indigenous and Indigenous-led and Indigenous developed, and I'll continue to work with you in that regard. The bylaw question, I know that it's a thorny issue. We have set up in some places, such as Ontario, a tripartite table with Indigenous leadership. I did this with National Chief Archibald before she got into this role. And the province. But I understand the gap. We had some movement during COVID to enforce bylaws because it was an emergency. And I understand the need to have those bylaws enforced. And I'll continue to press in that regard. I recognize the problem. I recognize the complexity of the problem. But I also recognize the need to fix it, and I'll do my best to keep pressing on that. But you have indeed identified a gap, and it needs to be addressed, and I thank you for raising it. Chief Harris from Douglas First Nation, thank you again for intervening. I hope that within this room, whether it's in the Indigenous-led consultations for UNDRIP or in the consultations that will be done through the Justice Department, that in some way, I don't know where you're sitting, that in some way, shape, or form, we will get to a point, there you are, we will get to a point where you are consulted on this. You need to be heard. As I said in the session earlier today, it is not for me to be the arbitrator of disputes among First Nations over land. As hard as that is, I think you will have to sit down with your neighboring communities and figure that out. I know that that's hard. I don't want to be Big Brother. I can't be Big Brother. It won't be a solution. So I know that that's. I said this morning I was just being honest. I'm saying now I'm just being honest. And but as regards UNDRIP, every community hopefully will have a chance to be consulted either through the Indigenous-led consultations or through the Justice consultations. Whatever the nature, like whether, treaty, modern treaty, no treaty, we have to try to reach out to everybody in the development of an action plan.
Thank you, Minister Lametti. We will now go to microphone 2.
Good afternoon again. My name is Chief Joyce McLeod from Northern Saskatchewan. I just had a couple of issues here, and one of them is I come from Northern Saskatchewan, and during the COVID, we've had a lot of problems regarding drugs, especially meth, in our communities, and also the gangs in our community. A lot of times we're home invasions, and a lot of times we're kind of stuck because of there's a high percentage of female and male, young males, about between 20 and 30 years old, that come and go from the provincial jails, and I think most of them are related to the gangs. But when I asked for help, I said there seems to be nowhere to go. There's no reintegration programs in the city. There's no reintegration programs for the young offenders or the people that have been incarcerated. But there is one available for the offenders that come from the from prisons, federal prisons, but nothing for provincial. The offenders that come from the provincial jails. I'm just wondering, I said, due to the lack of programs, like, is there anywhere else we can go? Like, we need those programs in our communities to keep our communities safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief McLeod. Looking towards our Zooms, we have no hands raised, so I will go to microphone 1, please.
White and Peace Nuxil, Iskui Kalupa Kankantel Smokamith. My name is Keith Grow. I'm the Chief of Lower Smokemeat Indian Band. And sorry, Minister Lametti, this is not for you. I want to put a formal complaint on the floor. The disgrace that I saw in the last 3 days to our elders. That is uncalled for, Executive. You need respect. I heard it being said by our National Chief. We're bringing back tradition and culture. And you cannot give our elders time to speak on this floor? That is so uncalled for. I just want to put that formally out there. Chairs, I appreciate the work you do, and I understand that you have to keep it within a timeline. I suggest that as we move forward into the future, our elders be a minimum of 5 minutes. And I'd love to see that change happen. It is, I don't mind, go ahead, cut me off. I'm a big guy, I can deal with it. I've held my voice for 3 days, but I could not go home without saying something. I sent a complaint to my regional chief yesterday to let him know how embarrassed I am. I have to go back to my community and my nation and tell them we did 4 resolutions. We passed 4 resolutions? There's 48. So I apologize, Minister Lametti, for taking the time right now, but I had to put the formal complaint on the floor before we're done the day. So Lim, thank you, Regional Chief TG. I appreciate you telling me to come up.
Thank you, Chief Grohl. And it is on the record. I would now go back to microphone 2.
Delegate Chair, thank you very much, Chair. Kakido, kita tamaskat now I acknowledge all of you. Ugamawak, Chiefs, Ugamaisquiyuk. Minister, I just first of all want to thank you for the continued work with 2 of our First Nations in the Prince Albert Land Council. Brian Hurdlaw, by the way, Grand Chief of the Prince Albert Land Council. Thank you for working with Shoal Lake and Redder and their the good work that they're doing in the area of justice with their justice initiative. Thank you very much for that. Minister, let's work together. Let's recognize Timber Bay Children's Home as a residential school. Let's do that for the survivors. I ask you to work with your fellow ministers on that. The survivors are waiting. So let's do that work, okay? I thank you. Minister, in the area of policing, I mentioned this to you this past summer. Let's put that federal Crown prosecutor back in the provincial justice system in the province of Saskatchewan, so the RCMP can enforce our First Nations bylaws and maybe our BCRs, our band council resolutions. Let's do that. The RCMP are not enforcing them, and we are. I thank you for working with AFN to co-develop the legislation on making the policing, First Nations policing, essential service. Thank you for that. Again, in the area of justice, I think I think it's there already, but more programs are needed in the area of restorative justice. We have an alternative measures program in the province of Saskatchewan. Although those court workers they got very low wages, but we need those programs for those court workers that help the people that in the court system. And that's restorative justice, Minister. So, I thank you. Let's do that work. Let's do that work. I ask you. I thank you.
Thank you, Grand Chief. Minister Lametti, if you could have his microphone open, please.
Thank you. Let me begin with Grand Chief from Prince Albert. I'll look into the residential school that you mentioned. Please give the name. I'll work with Ministers Miller and Haidu. I don't see any reason not to rely on a definition. To rely on a definition to exclude people. So I will get more information on the file. On policing, that's a good suggestion with respect to bylaws. I'm open to suggestions. We've already heard Chief Maracle. I understand the problem. I understand it's a problem across many parts of Canada, and I'm willing to work to find a solution. And I'm very much in favor of working together on more restorative justice options in the criminal justice system. That bill that I spoke about earlier, Bill C-5, in allowing conditional sentence orders, I think opens the door for a great deal of restorative justice programming. There's some really good things happening. For example, here in British Columbia, and with the First Nations, the BC First Nations Justice Council, the work that Doug White is doing, and we're helping to fund with the government of British Columbia community justice centers, which have wraparound programming for people, individuals who've come into contact with the criminal justice system. That's an interesting model. We have invested more in Indigenous court workers. That's another model. But there are ways to do it, and I'm committing to you to work with you to do that. So thank you.
Thank you, Minister Miller. That is all the time we have, so I'm sorry to the speakers who are at the podium, but we must proceed with the agenda. So I will now turn it over.
I'm way better looking than Miller.
I don't know if the mic heard that.
You just called me Miller.
Excuse me. I work in justice on top of that. I'm sorry, Minister Lametti. I will now hand the stage off to my co-chair, Weena.
Thank you, Minister Lametti.